is The Furnace with John Burton.
All right, I am hanging out kind of in the woods. Our house is kind of surrounded by some woods, and I think there's critters running up underneath my porch. But man, it's a beautiful day here in Branson, Missouri. Let's talk about something today that's a big deal for a lot of people. It's the issue of failure or perceived failure, especially in life or in ministry or in leading a church or a business or on and on. And specifically, I'm going to kind of target ministry and what people would say is success in ministry versus failure in ministry. And I need to debunk some of that because it's wrong. In fact, a lot of people's callings, a lot of people's ministries are being wildly compromised because they are using the wrong metrics. They are attempting to pursue really the American dream in the guise of developing a church or a ministry, and it's really doing damage to the call of God. And so we need to deal with that. First of all, very, very quickly, let me hit on this. Every ministry that is big with a lot of people and financially prosperous and expanding, they're not all bad. Okay, so let's come at it from the other direction for just a moment. Because a lot of people, especially those who are insecure in their own small ministries, I'm talking about numerically small, sometimes they can point the finger and they can accuse large ministries of compromising or of selling out or whatever. And we got to be careful about that because that's absolutely not always the case. And so there are some large and numerically growing and developing ministries out there that are phenomenal. And in fact, when revival breaks out, get ready for the thousands and tens of thousands to come flooding in. And so we got to be careful that we don't do that. And then also, we need to understand that there are times that people are not successful because of their own issues. So that's true often. So they're not good leaders. They don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to raise up others. They can't disciple. They can't preach. No one wants to listen to them preach. They really don't pray. Maybe they don't have a lot of faith. They don't have vision. They don't, they're not truly led of the Spirit. Go on and on and on. So there are a bunch of legitimate reasons why a church or ministry is not successful. And when I say successful, I'm not always talking about numbers or money or image, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But we need to deal with that. So some people, they get mad at all the big churches because they think they're doing something wrong. That's not always the case. Other people, they're struggling in ministry, and they're also pointing the finger, and people aren't showing up or whatever. And so we got to be careful about that as well. Now, let's get into this. The monster of the American monster of success and growth, and that American dream of having the biggest church and the coolest stuff going on, that is killing a lot of ministries. I firmly believe that many churches and ministries are called to be small. They're called to have a specific assignment, and they're called to not exist forever. They're not all called to continue to grow numerically. They're not all called to be around for 50 years or 20 years. They're not, absolutely not. And I believe that, and I've been through this, and I'm going to talk about my story in a moment, and I'm going to share something with you. Someone emailed something to me that just blew my mind. And I'm going to get right to the meat of this here in a second. But there are a lot of ministries that are seasonal. They're called for a time. They're called even as specialists. They're apostolic. They're called to break the ground. Some plant, some water. A lot of these churches out there don't realize that or these pastors don't realize that they're not supposed to water. They just were supposed to plant, and they're done. They completed an apostolic work, but no, they hang on for too long, and they keep watering and watering, but they're not called to water. They're not good at it. But so those of you that are struggling in ministry, I want to encourage you. Number one, don't point your finger at the big churches. Number two, honestly consider what some of your weak points might be. You know, and I'm a believer that we strengthen our strengths. You know, a lot of people say you need to strengthen your weaknesses. I believe we strengthen our strengths and we minimize our weaknesses, because it's impossible to be strong in all the areas that we're weak. You know, I can write. I'm a pretty good writer. But I can't draw. Even though I'm a graphic designer, if you were going to give me a pen and a paper, I can't draw. My kids do better than me. And so I'm not going to focus on learning how to draw. But there are times in graphic design, you know, I do that just as a hobby now. It used to be a business. There are times in graphic design where it does help me to be able to freehand a little bit. So I minimize that weakness, but I am not going to become strong as someone who's an artist who's drawing. And so you need to analyze kind of where you're at. Strengthen your strengths, but minimize your weaknesses. And so you might be struggling unnecessarily because of your own issues, your own resistance to raise others up or delegate or whatever. And so you know, consider all of that. But then you got to get with God. It's like, all right, God, what is the assignment here? What have you called me to do? What is this all about? You know, so here comes my story in Manitou Springs, Colorado. So after some years of youth pastoring in San Diego and Dallas, Texas, God very clearly called us to plant a church in Manitou Springs, Colorado. Now, Manitou Springs is known by many as a very wicked place. Dutch Sheets told me that he believes it's the darkest city in the nation. Anton LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible, lived there, right? And boy, oh boy, the stories I could tell. I've written about a lot of the stories in some of my books. I mean, crazy stuff, supernatural weird stuff. And that was our reality for several years. And so we quickly determined that as we had a growing church, we were growing in number. In fact, since the mid-'80s, no church has lasted beyond 2 years in Manitou Springs. There were only 4 other churches. One of them was an Episcopal church that had a handful of people, and that pastor was, her name was Myrna. She was just as cool as could be. And then that was it. In terms of a life-giving church, the church of the city and the pastor of the city was a heretical church, and they considered that man to be the pastor of the city. He was on the city website. Heretical church, pro-homosexual, did not believe in hell or Satan, that kind of thing. And so that was the church. That was the city church right there in Manitou Springs. And so we started, and we developed. And we were growing numerically, and we had a base of prayer, and we were worshiping, and we were driving the demons out, and we were having impact. It was awesome. And but then something happened where God made it very clear. I'm not going to get into details on this short podcast. Very clear that we could not fulfill our assignment if we continued as we were. In fact, he told me very clearly multiple times that I was done. But it was crazy because I wasn't done. I mean, the mission was nowhere near complete. But God told me I was done. Over a period of 3 weeks, 8 or 9 different people came to me, people like most of them I didn't know, prophesied and says, God says you're done, you're done, you're done, you're done, you're done. I mean, I have tears coming out of my eyes as people are saying this, and I didn't know what to do. And God made it very obvious that we were to transition from trying to develop a typical church, because guess what? God never really told me to develop a typical church. It just made common sense, I guess, and that's what we did. He did tell me that we were to be an apostolic ministry of prophetic intercession. I knew that. But we had deviated just a little bit. I mean, just barely. We didn't do anything wrong in terms of like evil, or I didn't make this bad, terrible decision. We just kind of just got off center a little bit. And it's like, so different thing, you know, when you have a growing church, you've got to focus on different things, and there's different demands of the people. And so all of that became now the thing that I'm carrying. And God said, I didn't call you to this. He said, you've done well, but you're done. I should back up. He didn't say, I didn't call you to this. He said, he needs me to recenter, is what he was saying. And so long story short, I'm sitting at the altar one day, not knowing what to do. I was all by myself. And I was wrestling with all this. And God spoke to me and he said, John, what are you doing? And, you know, I'm like, I don't know. He said, I told you were done. And I knew this meant that the church thing was done, and it was time for us to transition into just a white hot furnace of prophetic intercession. I knew it, but I was wrestling with it. And I said, I'm just sitting there all by myself in the dark. I said, yeah, I know. I said, you know, God, if we make a shift like this is a massive shift. You know, we're going to lose people. And he didn't answer me. I just sat there as alone as I could be, with God staring right through my soul. And I wrestled with that, and I said, God, you know, we've got about a $13,000, $14,000 a month budget. We got bills to pay. 27,000 square foot property release in here. And I said, if I make this change, we're going to lose money. And he didn't say a word. And boy, was I wrestling at this point. And finally, what was pretty deep in my soul was, I said, you know what, God, I'm a visionary. I've been casting vision. I've been rallying the troops. We've been gaining momentum. We've been moving in this direction. And if I make this radical shift, people are going to think I'm crazy. They're going to wonder what in the world I'm doing. They're going to be upset. I said, God, if I make this change, I'm going to lose my reputation. And this time he said something. He said, good. He said, my son was of no reputation. Why should you be? And you talk about being wrecked, messed up. And that very moment, I went back to the computer. I changed the name on the screens that were in the sanctuary there from Revolution Church to Revolution House of Prayer. I made the change. And people left, and we lost a lot of money. We moved out of that property. People weren't happy at all that I had made that change. You know, in fact, there was this underground movement, my worship leader and others, that were kind of rallying against me. And we lost about 75% of our people. But I knew in my spirit that we made the right decision. And boy, I wish I had time on this podcast to share every story of everything that happened going forward. We went from a vibrant church that was having a lot of very cool things happen. We went to a whole other level with fewer people, and supernatural things were happening like I can't even explain. I was getting emails from as far away as Egypt, people upset with our ministry. And we weren't doing anything in the public. We were simply in a prayer room praying. We moved out of a 27,000 square foot building into a 1,000 square foot prayer room. And we were praying. That's all we were doing. And the quote unquote worshipful master of the Masonic temple there sent me vile emails. A satanic church sent some horrifying emails cursing us. We were getting all sorts of stuff. There was a There was a group of people online rallying against us. It was insane. We were seeing God move in power. We were seeing us move in the Spirit and seeing breakthrough happen. It was incredible. And in fact, one particular evening, I was sitting there in this, after, if you can call it a service, we had just a handful of people there in our 1,000 square foot property. And someone came up to me as they were leaving, and this person worked in a donut shop and didn't have any money at all. You know, it was paycheck to paycheck for sure. And she came up and she said, let me back up. That exact day, my wife was in tears, and I told her, I said, Amy, God's about to work a miracle. There's a financial miracle coming, because we lost a lot of money, just as I knew would happen. I just bought my wife her dream house in Colorado Springs overlooking Pikes Peak, and all of a sudden the money's disappeared. And I said, you watch God move. There's a financial miracle coming. Okay, now, this person who worked in the donut shop, she came and she said, God told me to give you this. She gave me this envelope and she left. And in this envelope was $22,000, cashier's check. I about passed out. The next week, she gave us a check for $20,000. And, I went home that first night and I smiled and I said, you love those told you so moments, right? And I'm like, Amy, God's with us, I'm telling you. And I gave her the check and it just blew her mind. And so God's answer for our ministry was to shrink in number and to grow in impact. Now stay with me. I'm going to share an email with you in just a second, but stay with me. So more miraculous things happen, and then God moves our family to Kansas City. I'm at the International House of Prayer for a couple years, leading one of the internships there. Then we go to Detroit, start a church there. And then I had passed off the ministry to my lead intercessor, Miles, and his wife, Jody. So now they were leading this small ministry. They actually moved back into the 27,000 square foot property, and it was going well. And the years go by, and then I get a phone call from Miles. And we would stay in touch, but we wouldn't, he wouldn't call me with issues hardly ever. And he said, John, I don't know what to do, but I need your help. We're kind of at the end, and I'm going to make this story short as I can, but we're at the end. I don't know what to do. The money's gone. People are leaving. We're down to about 10 people. So I gathered a group of people from Detroit, and then I drove by and picked up some people from Kansas City. We went out to Colorado, had this blow-up conference. I raised a bunch of money for the ministry there. God moved. I cast the vision for Manitou Springs, why it's a critical place for revival, national revival. It's an important piece of the puzzle. And so I cast that vision, and it was great. And long story short, we went home. Miles calls back a week later. He says, that was awesome, John, but now we're even losing more people. People told me they're moving away. And honestly, I don't know what to do. So we took another group out there the next month and did the same thing, had another conference, except it was a dud. It was horrible. It was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I didn't understand what was going on. Couldn't figure it out. And, we raised money a little tiny bit, and whatever we raised, we gave it to him, went back home. He said, John, I feel like really something needs to happen. So we went out a third time, this time no conference. We just prayed, and we felt like we had to shut it down. I wondered if it was plan B. I wondered if it was because of the lack of the response of the people. I still think that is possibly the case. We needed to see the people rise up, but they didn't. And so now what? Well, we decided to close it. And I prayed over Miles and Jody and released them from their assignment. And we were going to load up all of the stuff in a U-Haul truck and take it back to our ministry in Detroit. Well, that particular night, my father-in-law has a dream. In this dream, he sees me loading up the U-Haul with all of the church equipment, the chairs and the musical instruments and everything. And he starts yelling at me. He's like, John, get out. Hurry. The floods are coming. The floods are coming. It's time. And so in the dream, I finish loading up the truck and I leave. Well, that night, after he shared that dream, I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be crazy? Like if 24 hours after we actually do leave, that if the floods didn't come, intercession is lifted off of the city, apostolic government is lifted off of the city, we're moving out of the city. And so the next, I said, that'd be crazy. Next day we did that exact thing and loaded up the truck and spent the night and got up in the morning and drove away. We're driving to Detroit and I get a text and crazy happened. And less than 24 hours after intercession was lifted off of Manitou Springs, absolutely horrendous flooding. I'm talking about, it was in the national news. Horrendous flooding just swept through the entire city of Manitou Springs. Devastating properties. Cars were being swept away. It was unreal if you could see the video. And our house of prayer, that 27,000 square foot building, it hung over the main creek that ran through the town. And the creek that ran through town is usually maybe 6 inches deep or something. And it was like 9 feet deep suddenly. And it was touching the foundation of our house of prayer. And 3 people actually died in that flood. And it was very shortly after that another sign happened. Now you got to understand that Colorado Springs is very dry. And you don't get tornadoes certainly when you're up in the mountains. And the highest recorded tornado in American history touched down on Pikes Peak. And so we had the whirlwind and the flood as a sign to us that we were on assignment, we were holding back the darkness, we were being effective, and unfortunately we had to move on. Well, I am so blessed because I received an email yesterday, and I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. After we left, New Life Church, which is an amazing church in Colorado Springs, they planted another church right there in Manitou. They've contacted me several times, and they have thanked me for my labor there and our labor there and everything that we've done and plowing the ground. And well, I just got this. I got this email. Let me just read it. And I asked for permission to read and share this. I might include this in an article. And this is from Sarah. She says, "Hey John, I love getting your emails. They are so challenging and so good. Thank you for what you do. I'm a huge believer in giving credit where it's due. And since you were such a huge part of our transition and journey to Manitou, as David and I are a week away from transitioning out, I wanted to give you an update. Because you sowed seeds for so many years and made this ground so fertile, you wouldn't recognize Manitou today. It's becoming a beautiful community. Restoration taking place in the supernatural and in the natural. Houses and buildings being restored and families moving in, seeking community. We've prayed over every inch of the city. The bridge over Rainbow Falls was restored, and the day it reopened, we prayed over it as a city gate and renamed Beautiful at the Lord's prompting. The same weekend, we dedicated the old Masonic Lodge as the new worship space for New Life Church Manitou, cleansed the ground and claimed that gate as well. The Mineral Springs by the Loop was recently refaced, and coincidentally, quote unquote, a new life member was contracted to do the work. He wrote our prophetic passage for Manitou on the back of each rock, Isaiah 41:17 through 20. The poor and needy are searching for water where there is none, and I, the Lord, will answer them. And now Scripture is hidden in one of the central fountains in Manitou. It's our little secret. Not long after that, a sign that has been decades missing from the Rainbow Falls Bridge was replaced. It says Manitou Springs, Healing Waters. New Life Manitou has been a full-fledged weekly church for 3 years now. We beat the odds. It's a thriving community of believers serving the city and accepted as a part of the community. We're meeting in the renovated and very well cleansed Masonic Lodge on El Paso Street and running around 150 each Sunday. Every week, it seems, a new family shows up saying they just felt called to Manitou. We're literally the only evangelical church here, but Manitou Springs has embraced and not just tolerated us. Hiawatha Gardens, that's the 27,000 square foot building we were in, where you guys met for the House of Prayer, is being restored. Interestingly, your banner is still hanging on the back door, even though they've been in there cleaning and renovating. The sign remains. Just a reminder of your mark on this community. David and I have been here for 4 years and we're now being called away. My heart is so torn. I've grown to adore this town and its people. Our neighbors who are atheists and lesbians and agnostics who are leaving, we now have to entrust to Jesus. We're headed back to San Antonio to pastor a church there. I can't help but to think of your story of leaving and how it must have been so bittersweet for you and your family. We've certainly felt the weight of living here, the call and yet the resistance and pressure. And yet the yearning to see more of God's movement, knowing that you wouldn't be here to see the completion firsthand. Because of that, I wanted to tell you again that your hard work and toil and trials and prayer and faithfulness did not go unseen, unnoticed, or unfruitful. Your obedience here in Manitou for all those years paved the way for what is happening now and for the restoration and revival that is happening here in Manitou. I know from firsthand experience that it wasn't easy and that you suffered for the call, but your legacy lives on here. Your faithfulness and intercession and prophetic words spoken over this city tore down strongholds and softened hearts. You pastored this city so well. Well done, good and faithful servant. And thank you for giving us so much insight and comfort 4 years ago when we were so freaked out about moving here. Thank you for being the forerunner and for giving us the courage to carry the torch. I'm about to cry as I'm reading this. Thank you for introducing us to Miles and Jody, who passed the prophetic torch to us. I still have the House of Prayer banner they gave us and still weep at the thought that our weekly prayer meetings were held in the very same room as your early prayer meetings were held. God has such a heart for this place, and my heart breaks to leave it. We have wept over it, loved it, and learned so much in our time here. But our time is done, and we did what we came to do. 4 years of so much joy, so much travail, so much beauty, and you were such a huge part. So thank you so much for your labor, John. You are a giant in the kingdom, and I just wanted to let you know that we recognize your sacrifices and work here. It lives on, and you are part of a very beautiful story that God is writing in Manitou Springs. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The Father is well pleased. Love, Sarah and David. Whew. Yeah, that rocked me just about right now. So, what does this all mean? Your impact may not be seen in your lifetime, or your impact might not be seen for 20 years until you're done. You know, your impact might be different than what you think it is. And so I just want to encourage you, let go of that incredible burden that this American Western culture has put on the church to numerically grow and to... Again, it's not bad. It's not bad to do that if God's called you to do that. You got to understand me. You have to understand. But the answer is this: do what God has called you to do. He brings the increase. He builds His church. You know, and I look at Manitou Springs now, 150 member church in that place, and it took years and years and years. See, we started with the church, and we were hitting about 120 to 150 or so when we were there at times. But God said, this church thing, Manitou's not ready yet. And you got to back up, and you got to do what I've called you to do, and you got to transition, and you've got to tap into the roots here in the city. You've got to prophesy over it. You've got to intercede. And most nights we'd be out there interceding. And then you're done, and He sent us on to other ventures, and someone else picked up the torch. And Amy and I were able to move on to do what God called us to do. See, I could still be in San Diego, where I started in full-time ministry as a youth pastor. That would have been a great place to minister my whole life. But we weren't supposed to. We were supposed to be there for a short time. We could have stayed in Manitou Springs. We weren't supposed to. We wouldn't have accomplished all this other stuff we've done. We could have stayed at the International House of Prayer. It wasn't supposed to happen. We could have stayed in Detroit. It wasn't supposed to happen. You know, we're here now in a whole new season of life in Branson, Missouri, where I write for Charisma Magazine and, as my ministry, as opposed to leading a church. And we've built 3 businesses, and I'll travel and speak at times. And we wouldn't be doing this if we were still doing something else. And, if I was obsessed with making something successful in the eyes of America, I would not have fulfilled my mission. And so I want to encourage you. Heck, even legitimate failure where you screw up, it's all right. It's okay. WD-40, the spray that you spray on squeaky hinges and things. The reason why they named it WD-40 is because they failed 39 times until they found a successful chemical makeup that became WD-40. So your church, your mission, your time in life, you might be at church 39, church 5, church 2, ministry 3, business 4, even legitimate failure where you just didn't have what it took. It's okay. It doesn't mean you didn't plant roots. It doesn't mean that you didn't have impact. It means that you're growing, you're developing. How many electric light bulbs were developed and failed before the correct one was found? Failure shouldn't be scary. But even beyond that, the big lesson I want to bring you is don't buy into the American lie. Some of you are supposed to be underground. You're supposed to have a small ministry. You're supposed to have a small remnant. You're supposed to be intercessors. You're not supposed to focus on growing numerically. You're not supposed to have all of these programs. You're not supposed to be there forever. You're not supposed to. Losing people isn't necessarily a sign of weakness. So you got to grab hold of this. And I wanted just to bring this podcast to you kind of from my heart, from my own experience. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. Bottom line is more and more, even though I know there are successful large churches, and I'm careful not to ridicule them by any means. In fact, I really enjoy large churches that are legit. But I can look at some of these others that they're just not stewarding the call to revival, and prayer's not in the house, and I'm like, they're just not really successful. They're just not. Looks like they are, but they're not. And some of these other ministries that are just fervent in intercession, and they're doing what God's called them to do, they're creating a legacy in the spirit. Maybe people will never see it. I'm so blessed that I got to read this email. Some of you may never get to read an email like that. Maybe you'll never know. But I'll tell you this. If you are obedient, humble, teachable, not arrogant, not prideful, you're not driven by selfish ambition, I'm telling you what, you're going to leave an impact, and it's going to be good. It's going to be powerful, even though you may not learn about it for years and years and years and years, or maybe when you enter eternity. But stay faithful. Stay faithful. Your legacy is not dependent on whether your church thrives or dies. It's dependent on your obedience and your love for Jesus. So just want to encourage you in that. I'd love for you to leave some comments. Let me know what you think, and talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Furnace with John Burton. You can access media, read articles, and partner with the ministry online at burton.tv. And by all means, share this podcast with those who are hungry for revival, reformation, and revolution.